I find there's too much emphasis in the fact of it gaining three levels of education, where people that are overweight are basically gaining three levels of education, they're owning a property, they're going into marriages, and they think they're better than everybody else. And in some respects, right, you think your speed just comes into the fact of knowing an academic skill. No, it doesn't. The trouble is, it's like if you go and get tested for blind dyslexia with your mild degree, already gained three levels of education with or without an overlay, and after being discharged from a speech therapist, the bottom line is sport comes into it. There's a physical side. And when you look at an 8 of 1500 metres, to be honest, you've got a lot of slim people overtaking people that are overweight. And yet you tend to realise that in busy, like, practical jobs, as in hotels, bar, as well as retail shops, a lot of people that are slim can like go on training courses. They will obviously train people up, and they'll start covering for managers and obviously bosses on days off on holidays. So there is the actual physical side. The bottom line is, the only snag is when you've obviously set somebody up in a single parent situation and they're being put onto a council estate, and part of your upbringing wasn't being brought up on a council estate, you was brought up in an own property, a business middle class educated background with shared royal ancestors with the royal family. It was a continuous thing for 46 years of my life. And I have to say, in some respects, right, if you've got obviously other adults trying to obviously help you raise that child, and they start calling yourself to your child, saying you're thick and stupid and not intelligent, the child is not going to respect you. And half the actual battle is the fact is, right, if they are calling your child to them, right, uh, and basically calling the parent or anything like that, you're going to lose respect straight away. And then you're going to find it very, very challengeable trying to put house rules, boundaries, safeguarding things to keep the child safe. And on a council estate, it's far more challenging than an own property, as you know. And you have to watch, who your child is obviously knocking about with. Unfortunately, people have children and they go through diagnose, and part of the diagnose says they don't have the same ability, instinct as other children, or the same maturity as other children, and in some sense they get easily led into things and led into danger, is what they're obviously saying. That so some of my children have not got the same sort of maturity as others. Some were very, very good listeners, and some were, how can I say, they're not obviously listening. And even if you tried to put the boundary or even like the safeguarding discipline with them, they were just rebelling and going aggressive. You know what I mean? And their actual friends were being a lot more calmer for their parents when discipline was obviously being provided with boundaries and keeping them safeguards away from obviously older children, and especially like older men. So in some sense, there is obviously challenges, in the fact that not everybody's going to gain three levels of education becoming an actual parent. And in that, if you obviously pass your maths and English, you have worked in an office, in some sense, looking at your actual tree, right, you're going to be more intelligent than some of your grandparents that have already passed away. Employment at one point, you could obviously go into it without your maths and English, right? And in some sense, it's like some of your grandparents like went without the maths and English and brought up families like, okay, with 58-year marriage as well as a 36-year marriage, you know what I mean? So in some sense, right, you can see the actual state of change of society. And in that is that you've come about people gaining three levels of education and I'm better than you. And it's like, well, your intuition can obviously be at an actual GCSE level. You can still obviously weigh up who's going to be a bad and basically a good person. And, you're going to read the expressions, the way they're obviously communicating to you. And to be honest, if you find that the person is not listening and basically being aggressive and so on, and we're not even at that listening stage or being calm when we're obviously communicating, there becomes an actual problem with the child. It becomes under a diagnosis. It does not have the same instinct as everybody else. And on top of that, it doesn't have the same maturity. And if the fact you've obviously had problems with other adults from your family, or even an ex-partner's father, say you're not intelligent, you've not gained 3 levels of education, it doesn't matter. You still had GCSE level, you still worked in an office environment, you still gained that NVQ, you still held jobs over 2 years, at that. Right, so the thing is, if you come to an actual basic office skill, that is like an old intelligence from an older generation before you've started obviously indulging higher education and 3 levels of education. So in some respect, it's like, well, how did your grandparents manage before higher education went out the roof in the UK? That is a question you obviously need to ask. And the thing is, it's like when you're obviously bringing up children and you've got other family members obviously helping, you still have to come to the agreement of the way you obviously discipline a child and getting the child to obviously listen to you. You can't just stitch somebody up in a single parent situation saying you've not gained 3 levels of education, you're at a GCSE level, you're stupid, you're thick. You can't obviously bring up making a child not listen, calling the actual the parent to the child disrespects you, it's listening to more of the actual adults in the family, or even that the grandparent or something, that's when you start losing respect. It's like you shouldn't be calling, anybody towards, the actual child. It's like you shouldn't be calling parents, you shouldn't be calling grandparents, because the actual child is going to lose respect for any parents or grandparents, and that is the danger of it. It's like, when my grandparents were obviously in a 58-year marriage and a 36-year marriage, there always seemed to be the actual agreement in the fact the way you brought up an actual child. And if we're going to discipline this child this way, we will stick to this way, right? You don't obviously get a child against its mother calling it thick and stupid, because you're not even gonna, that child's not even gonna respect, and to be honest with you, is that you've done a lot more in the fact of supporting a child's work, a lot more than your actual parents. You've gone through target words up to year 6, you've gone through spellings up to year 6, you've gone through stage books, completed them on library books. If you're showing your child this and you're providing that homework at home to make your child to be on target before starting high school, you're going to have the same intelligence as your child. Have you obviously realised that? You know what I mean? No matter what obviously happened to you in the past, and yet, you pass your maths and English later on these adult courses to clear the debt in the country, where we want people off the actual benefit and basically back into work, recovering the debt in the country, because, it's not obviously paying its way in the fact, and even to the point of government figures, a recession, pandemic, and looking at them figures there, that is their income and expenditure as much as when you're from an actual business middle class background and you're doing accountancy and doing the figures on a monthly basis. It's the same thing, income and expenditure. It's that in the government, they're dealing with much, much higher figures to deal with the fact of figures in a country. So the masterminds, yeah? So some of which have got obviously royal ancestors, and they're obviously cousin to my tree, but I have to say they're very, very intelligent. They know, And at the end of the day, it's you have to observe what's going on within your country, as well as what you know in relation to how you've been brought up in a business, middle class, educated sport background with shared royal ancestors. And it's you've got all of this thing on the news saying pandemic, recession. They're literally looking at the figures and look at how many single parents we've got in the country. Look at how many mental health people we've got in the country. There's a heck of a lot. And it goes on, you know what I mean? So in some respect, a child is only going to respect you when you've got other adults agreeing the same thing about, how can I say, discipline, right? And if you start calling, you know, the parent or the grandparent towards the child is not going to have any respect whatsoever. Yeah, and that's where you lose respect. Thank you.